There haven't been many areas where Republicans and Democrats agree in recent years, but one issue that has both the right and the left in agreement is the need for criminal justice reform. The incarcerated population in the U.S. has skyrocketed since the end of the 1970s, and in 2017, more than 1.5 million Americans were in state and federal prisons. But now, legislatures are pushing to bring the American incarceration rate in line with similarly sized countries around the world.
Cut 50 is a national initiative seeking to simultaneously shrink the prison population while making communities safer. The group was integral to the introduction and passing of the First Step Act, which President Trump signed into law earlier this year. Joining us now to discuss Cut 50 and some of the work being done is the group's co-founder and CEO, Jessica Jackson. Jessica, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me here.
Jessica, we appreciate it so much. So I was telling you this earlier, but one of the reasons I wanted to have you on this show was Cut 50 I have seen have an immeasurable impact on the Democratic Party. I've seen so many of these candidates that have come out with explicit cut the prison population by 50%, but nobody really understands the intellectual genesis of this. So can you just tell us a little bit about the history of the organization and how you have basically become the standard bearer for the Democratic Party when it comes to criminal justice?
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
So our organization was founded 6 years ago, and our intent was to cut 50% of the prison population while making our communities safer. What I didn't know in the very beginning was how big our coalition would grow. We've got folks on the left, folks on the right. Like you said, President Trump even joined in, signing the First Step Act last year. We've been able to pull in influencers as well as business leaders and really pass bipartisan legislation across states, across the federal government now, and change the narrative around criminal justice reform to talk about the people, their families, their communities that are being impacted by some of these tough on crime, which are really stupid on crime policies that are making us less safe.
Sure.
The conversation around the First Step Act, though, still focused a lot on what people call nonviolent offenders, sometimes even nonviolent first-time offenders. And there's this kind of myth out there of this perfect inmate that you're going to find who got caught with too much weed and is serving a 55-year prison sentence. And if you can just address that, then you're going to roll back mass incarceration. But what you find, as you've found over the years, is that no, you actually have to do some thorny political stuff. You have to get into what are some of the so-called violent convictions. So how do you move the conversation from where it's been for so long around nonviolent drug offenses to where you can actually make a dent in the prison population getting into violent? And you put violent in quotes because sometimes no violence was actually done in the commission of these crimes. If you sold drugs and you had a weapon on you, even if the weapon was legal, you could get classified as a violent criminal and then not eligible for early release or any reductions in these mandatory minimums. So how do you move that?
Yeah, well, I think we have to zoom out and talk about what our criminal justice system exists for. And it exists to make our communities safer, right? But what we've learned over the last 30 years of, again, lock 'em up, stupid on crime policies, is that our criminal justice system is actually failing to make anybody safer. The reason why is no matter what crime you've committed, you're incarcerated, you're basically warehoused, moved away from your entire network, traumatized oftentimes by the incarceration, not given a chance to rehabilitate yourself, and end up coming out with fewer opportunities than when you got started. So what we need, regardless of crime, because about 95% of the people who are incarcerated right now will be coming home at some point, is a fundamental shift in the system to where we're actually focused on addressing the underlying reasons why people commit crimes. We need mental health support. We need addiction treatment. We need job opportunities and training so that when people come home, they can actually find jobs. We need the private sector to step up and hire people. So we need to really fundamentally shift this. It's not about the kind of crime that the person committed. It's about how we're going to provide the support they need to get back on track and be successful when they come home.
Jessica, one of the things that focused on, so when I spoke with Van Jones earlier about this, one of the concerns there is about one of these people who's going to get released is going to go out and is going to commit a very violent crime. So what is the response for when something like that happens? Because it's a bit of a PR disaster if you do believe in criminal justice reform.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think we have to start with the premise that this is not everything's going to go perfectly. Not everybody's going to come home and enroll in college and go and get a great job, right? There are going to be bumps and bruises along the way, especially given the lack of infrastructure we have in communities for people to succeed. So I think you just have to build the goodwill. For decades, we were plagued by the story of Willie Horton. That was every politician's defense to not passing smart on crime policies that would actually address these underlying reasons people are committing crime. And then last summer, we were given the gift of Alice Marie Johnson. And suddenly people think about criminal justice reform, and they're thinking about a 63-year-old grandmother running across the street to hug her family and going home to her twin grandchildren. So I think we have to continue to put out the stories of people like Catherine Toney or Troy Powell, who came to the White House, who do come home and succeed and find employment and become just pillars in their communities.
But you also put your finger on what I was talking about earlier, that if Alice Marie Johnson is the standard, that you're not going to get very far in actually decarcerating. How many people have been released roughly as a result of the First Step Act?
At this point, we've had over 5,000 people come home. And I want to be very clear, many of these are folks who came home because of the retroactivity portion of the Fair Sentencing Act that was put into the First Step Act. So some of these, like Lonnie, who was released 2 days ago, just woke up in prison thinking they're going to die there, and find out, nope, actually you're going home immediately today. So a lot of these folks did not get some of the preparation that we built into First Step Act for them to get when they're coming home, the programming, the driver's licenses, but we are reaching out and trying to support them. In fact, Cut 50's put out a guide for anybody coming home from federal prison called the First Step to Second Chances Guide. You can find it at firststepact.org. And we're trying to create more of an infrastructure of groups on the ground that can help these folks get back on their feet.
And I also want to talk about the candidates, obviously. So which of the candidates do you think have the best criminal justice reforms in your estimation?
Yeah, Cut 50 has not endorsed any of the candidates. We're C3, but we're very excited to see, first of all, that this issue is even a campaign conversation, right? We didn't see this last election, and certainly not the elections before that. We've now got everybody from Senator Cory Booker to Senator Harris to former Vice President Joe Biden to Donald Trump competing as to who's going to do more on criminal justice reform, who's done more in the past. And I think that alone is a huge win for the criminal justice reform movement, and it sends a strong signal to people who are running for governor or state legislature or even county supervisor across the country that this is an issue that voters care about. This is an issue that you can get elected on if you're passing reform, and this is an issue that you should be paying attention to.
Well, you've certainly moved the Overton window on this, so
Thank you.
Appreciate it so much for coming on. Thank you. Coming up, a top Senate Dem consultant is not going to work with progressives, and Democrats might be okay with Susan Collins after all.
We checked the latest poll results, and Senator Bernie Sanders won't tear down Senator Elizabeth Warren. Team Rising weighs in next.